The plaza was noisy, filled with the usual sounds of the city. Cars honked, people chatted loudly, and the occasional street vendor shouted to get attention. Near the edge of all this noise, a small piano sat in a corner, a public piano meant for anyone to play. Its wood was scratched and worn, and a few of the keys had chipped edges, but it still held a certain charm. Children sometimes tapped on it for fun, and a few adults who liked music stopped to play a song or two. It was a familiar spot for everyone passing by, but today it would witness something unforgettable. A little girl, no more than 8, was sitting on the edge of the sidewalk nearby. Her clothes were worn and dusty, her hair tangled, and her small hands showed signs of a hard life. She had been surviving on the streets for months, living day by day. But today, she found herself drawn to the piano. She had seen it many times before, but had never dared to sit and play. Something about the way the keys glimmered in the sunlight called to her. She edged closer, watching people laugh, chat, and occasionally stop to listen to someone play. Her small heart beat fast, a mixture of nervousness and hope. A group of teenagers were hanging around near the piano, leaning against the stone wall behind it. They were loud, teasing each other, pushing and shoving playfully. One of them noticed the little girl watching and laughed. "Look at her," he said, pointing at her dusty clothes and small frame. "She thinks she can play that piano? That's a joke." His friends laughed and nodded, clearly enjoying the moment. The little girl felt her stomach tighten. She didn't like being mocked, but she also didn't have the energy to run away. She had learned to be quiet, to watch, and to stay out of trouble. Still, there was something in her that wanted to try, to show that she could do more than people expected. The teenagers made a small circle around her. "Go on," one of them said, smirking. "Play something. Let's see what you got." For a moment, the little girl froze. Her mind raced. She had never played on a real piano like this in front of people. She had only ever imagined melodies in her head or tapped out rhythms on boxes, windowsills, and old furniture. The thought of failing in front of these teasing teenagers made her want to turn and run, but something inside her pushed her forward. She walked slowly toward the piano, each step feeling heavier than the last. The crowd of strangers around the plaza had begun to notice the scene, some curious, some skeptical. She placed her small hands over the keys, feeling the smooth, cold surface beneath her fingertips. The piano smelled faintly of dust and polished wood, a comforting scent. She hesitated for a moment, her mind filled with doubt. But then she remembered the melodies she had kept in her head all these months. Music had been her friend, her comfort, her escape. She took a deep breath and pressed a key. A single note rang out, clear and surprisingly strong. The teenagers laughed louder this time, certain that her attempt would be nothing but noise. But the little girl didn't stop. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound guide her. Then she pressed another key and another. Slowly, cautiously, she began to play a simple melody, one she had memorized from listening to street performers and old recordings she had once heard from a shop window. Her fingers moved carefully at first, and faster as confidence grew. The sound that came from the piano was soft at first, then richer and more confident. It was a tune that seemed to float over the noise of the plaza, cutting through the chatter and the footsteps, making people stop and listen. The teenagers looked shocked. Their laughter faltered. One of them leaned forward, squinting at her hands. They had expected clumsy, childish notes, but instead, the music flowed naturally. The little girl didn't just hit keys randomly. She played with expression, with feeling. Each note seemed deliberate, as if she had been born knowing how to create beauty from the keys. People in the plaza began to notice. A man walking his dog paused, tilting his head in surprise. A woman with shopping bags stopped, letting them drop to the ground as she listened. A few children ran closer, curious about the tiny girl making such enchanting music. The noise of the city seemed to fade around her, leaving only the piano and her hands dancing over the keys. The teenager's confidence began to crumble. They exchanged looks, unsure of how to react. One whispered, "How is she doing that?" Another muttered, "She's just a kid." But the more they watched, the more they realized this was no ordinary child. Her fingers moved with precision and emotion, and even when she improvised slightly, it sounded intentional, beautiful, and full of life. It was as if the piano had been waiting for her all this time. The little girl was unaware of the attention she was drawing. She was lost in the music, her heart soaring with each note she played. Music had always been a secret world for her, a place where she could forget hunger, cold, and loneliness. And now, with the eyes of the city upon her, she felt a new kind of freedom. Her small body swayed slightly with the rhythm, and her expression softened, reflecting every emotion she felt. Every note carried a story, a piece of her life that she had kept hidden for so long. Some people in the crowd started taking out their phones. They quietly recorded her playing, sharing smiles and whispers of amazement. No one wanted to interrupt her, and even the teenagers, who had come to mock her, found themselves frozen, unsure whether to laugh or listen. The music had a hold over everyone, drawing them in with its honesty and simplicity. It wasn't perfect in a trained sense, but it was perfect in its heart. Minutes passed, though it felt like seconds to the little girl. She continued to play, switching from a gentle melody to a livelier tune she had made up in her head. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't care about the applause or attention, only the piano and the sound it produced. And slowly, something remarkable happened. People started clapping quietly at first, then more loudly, showing their appreciation. Even the teenagers clapped, though their faces still showed a mixture of shock and embarrassment. When she finally finished the piece, the plaza erupted in applause. Some people cheered, others whistled, and a few approached to offer small coins, snacks, or kind words. The little girl blinked, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. She had played because she loved it, not for praise or reward. And yet, the warmth of people's reactions filled her chest with a strange happiness. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. One of the teenagers, the one who had first mocked her, stepped forward hesitantly. He looked down at his shoes for a moment before muttering, "I didn't think you could really play." His friends stood silently, a mixture of guilt and awe on their faces. The little girl didn't answer. She only gave a small nod, shy but proud. She had proven something, not just to them, but to herself, that even in a world that had been harsh and cruel, she could create something beautiful. As the crowd slowly dispersed, some offering smiles and encouragement, the little girl stayed by the piano for a moment longer. She touched the keys gently, as if thanking them for allowing her to speak through music. Then she stood up and walked back toward the corner where she usually stayed, her small heart still racing, filled with a sense of accomplishment. The city noises returned, the cars honking and people talking, but something inside her had changed forever. She had found her voice, not in words, but in music. And she knew that no matter what the world thought, she had something precious that could never be taken away. Even as she walked away, people still turned to look, whispering to one another about the little girl who had made the piano sing. She had captured a moment in the hearts of strangers, a memory they would carry with them. And somewhere deep inside, she felt that maybe, just maybe, life could hold more than survival and hunger. Maybe it could hold beauty, wonder, and hope. All it took was a few notes, courage, and a little girl who dared to play. After the little girl walked away from the piano that day, she found a quiet corner behind a small fountain. Water trickled gently, making soft sounds as it landed in the stone basin. She sat on the edge, her hands still tingling from the music she had played. Her chest felt warm, like a fire had been lit inside her, though her stomach was still empty. She hugged her knees and let herself think about what had just happened. Her mind wandered back to the time before the streets had become her home. She remembered a small apartment, barely furnished, with peeling wallpaper and a tiny kitchen. Music had been all around her even then, coming from a small radio her mother used to tune every morning. She didn't remember how the apartment felt safe, only that the sound of melodies had always made her feel like she belonged somewhere. She had picked up simple songs from the radio, humming them quietly when no one was listening. Her mother had often smiled and nodded when she sang, though she had never taught her how to play properly. Life had been hard, but music had been a light. Then came the days that changed everything. Her mother grew ill and could not care for her anymore. With no family able to take her in, she had been forced to leave the apartment. The streets had become her home, a place full of danger, hunger, and uncertainty. Some days she went without food. Some nights she curled up on a bench or behind a dumpster, shivering under layers of old coats she had collected from discarded boxes. But music remained her friend. Even when her hands were cold and stiff, she would tap rhythms on any surface she could find. Broken chairs, pavement cracks, empty cans, anything that made a sound became an instrument for her imagination, in this harsh world. She had learned to be careful, to watch without being seen, to survive with silence as her shield. She had few friends, and most of the people she met only saw her as a street child, invisible or annoying. Yet in those quiet moments alone, she remembered melodies, played them softly to herself, and for a few minutes each day, she could forget everything that was wrong in her life. Today, however, had been different. She had touched a real piano, the kind that she had only dreamed of, and for the first time, she had shared her music with strangers. The applause, the wide eyes, the surprised smiles, they made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe life could be more than surviving, more than hiding in shadows, more than waiting for the next cold night. She closed her eyes and imagined the people's faces again. The way some had looked amazed, the way others had whispered to their friends, trying to understand how a child could make such sounds. Even the teenagers who had mocked her seemed different now. She could almost hear them thinking, realizing they had underestimated her. The little victory gave her a small, proud smile. Maybe she was stronger than she thought. Maybe she had more to offer than anyone knew. But as the feeling of warmth slowly faded, reality returned. She was hungry, and she had nowhere to go for the night. She knew the city could be kind sometimes, but mostly it was cold and indifferent. She picked herself up and began to wander through the streets, hoping to find something to eat. She passed familiar corners, empty alleyways, and shops closing for the evening. The shadows grew longer, and the sounds of the city began to change. Quieter now, more cautious, like the world itself was preparing for night. As she walked, she thought about the piano again. She had never imagined anyone would listen, let alone clap or smile. Her music had always been private, and now it had a voice in the world. She wondered if there were more pianos like that one, places where people could listen, where she could play, and maybe be seen for more than just a street child. The thought made her chest swell with cautious excitement. It was as if a tiny door had opened, and she could step into something unknown but wonderful. She wandered into a quieter neighborhood, where the buildings were older and the streets were narrower. A small group of children were playing with a makeshift ball made from scraps of fabric tied together. They laughed and ran, their feet slapping against the concrete. She watched for a moment, almost forgetting her hunger, before she moved on, trying not to get noticed. Children like them had homes, warm food, and families. It reminded her painfully of what she had lost. Yet it also reminded her of something she had gained: resilience, independence, and the ability to find music in any moment. Eventually, she found a small park with a bench. She climbed onto it and sat down, letting her body relax for the first time in hours. She pressed her fingers to the bench as if it were a piano, imagining melodies flowing from it. Even without real keys, she could hear the music in her mind. It was a comforting habit she had kept for survival. She hummed softly, closing her eyes, and for a few minutes the world faded. Hunger and cold felt distant as she played invisible notes, creating a concert that only she could attend. A man walked by, carrying a bag of groceries. He noticed the little girl and paused. His eyes softened, taking in the thin layers of clothing and the dusty hair. He didn't say anything, only nodded slightly before continuing on his way. She didn't look up, but she felt a small sense of connection. Even in a city of strangers, small gestures mattered. The night approached quickly. Street lights flickered on, casting a soft glow over the pavement. She knew it was time to find a place to sleep. She moved carefully, avoiding areas where people were likely to complain about her presence. She settled behind a low wall near a quiet building, curling up under her thin coats. The city around her had slowed, but her mind was still alive with music. She hummed melodies in the dark, letting them carry her into a lighter place where nothing could touch her. Music was her shield, her comfort, and her green dot. As she lay there, she thought about what might come next. Maybe she could play again tomorrow. Maybe someone would notice her talent again. The thought made her heart race with cautious hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream, not just of food or safety, but of music, recognition, and a life that could be more than surviving. Even if it was just a small spark, it felt like a beginning. She pressed her hands together, imagining the keys beneath her fingers once more, and whispered to herself, promising to keep playing. No matter what the world thought, the city slept around her, but inside her mind, melodies danced and soared. The little girl had faced a moment of fear, mockery, and doubt, and had turned it into a triumph. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. Music was her voice, her courage, and her hope. And as long as she had that, she had a chance to change everything. The next morning, the little girl woke up to the sounds of the city slowly coming alive. Birds chirped in the few trees scattered along the streets, and distant traffic hummed softly. The chill of early morning still clung to the air, and her thin coats barely kept her warm. She stretched and rubbed her hands together, feeling the stiffness from sleeping on the cold ground. Despite her discomfort, there was a spark of excitement in her chest. She thought about the piano, the applause, and the faces of the people who had stopped to listen the day before. The memory made her small heart race with a mixture of nerves and joy. She wandered toward the plaza where the piano sat, her feet careful on the uneven pavement. The city was beginning to bustle, shopkeepers opening their doors and street vendors arranging their stands. The plaza itself was quieter than usual in the early morning, but it felt welcoming to her, like a familiar friend waiting for her return. When she reached the piano, she paused for a moment, running her fingers lightly over the worn keys. Each key had a story, she thought, and today she would add her own. She sat on the bench and took a deep breath. Her mind was calm, focusing on the melodies she had carried in her head for so long. She pressed a key, then another, and slowly began to play. Her fingers moved with care, delicate at first, testing the instrument, but soon they found confidence. She began with a simple melody she knew well, one she had improvised countless times in her imagination. But as she played, she added small variations, letting the music breathe and grow. It was as if the piano and she were speaking to each other, sharing a secret language that no one else could fully understand. A few people passing by noticed her and paused. One older man stood with his hands behind his back, listening quietly. A young woman with a baby in her arms slowed her steps, smiling softly as the little girl's music reached her ears. Even the birds in the nearby trees seemed to chirp along in time, as though nature itself had tuned in. The music wasn't perfect, not in the way a trained pianist might play, but it had something far more valuable: heart, honesty, and raw beauty. As she continued, the crowd slowly grew. One by one, people stopped to watch. Some whispered to each other, amazed that such a small child could command the piano with such skill. Others took out their phones to record the moment, careful not to disturb her. The little girl barely noticed. She was lost in the sound, her mind filled with the joy of creation. The piano became an extension of her, every note an expression of her thoughts and emotions. She didn't need words. Her music spoke everything she wanted to say. Suddenly, a familiar group of teenagers appeared at the edge of the plaza. They had been the ones to mock her the day before. One of them whispered something to the others, and they laughed quietly, though it was clear their amusement was forced. They expected her to fail or make a mistake, but what they saw instead stopped them in their tracks. The little girl was playing with grace and confidence, her small hands moving with precision and purpose. Their smirks faded into confusion and slowly into awe. The girl continued, unaware of their gaze. She transitioned from her simple melody into something more complex, weaving in small improvisations she had learned from listening to street performers and recordings. The notes filled the plaza, dancing over the stone benches and fountain, echoing against the surrounding buildings. Passers-by stopped in their tracks, captivated by the unexpected beauty in the middle of a bustling city. Even the teenagers who had intended to mock her found themselves caught in the music, their laughter gone, replaced by silent admiration. As she played, she remembered her life on the streets. Every hardship, every cold night, every moment of hunger had shaped her in ways no one could see. And yet, here she was, turning all that into music. The piano didn't judge her. It accepted her as she was. It gave her a voice that no one could silence, a chance to tell her story without speaking. And as she played, she felt a deep connection to something greater than herself. The city, the people, the sounds around her, all seemed to join in harmony with the music she created. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The crowd had grown silently, people gathering to witness the little girl, who played with a soul far beyond her years. Some were moved to tears, others whispered softly, telling their companions to listen closely. The sound of coins clinking into a small hat on the ground reminded her that people wanted to show their appreciation, even if she didn't need it. Each note was a victory, a proof of resilience and courage. When she finally stopped, the plaza erupted in applause. People clapped, cheered, and some whistled in admiration. The little girl sat quietly for a moment, catching her breath, feeling the warmth of their recognition wash over her. She didn't play for attention, yet the acknowledgement made her heart swell with pride. Even the teenagers stepped forward, hesitating at first, then offering small nods of respect. One of them, the one who had been the loudest the day before, muttered, "I didn't think you could really do it." The others didn't argue. They simply watched, speechless. A man with a kind face approached her. He seemed to be in his 60s, with gray hair and gentle eyes. He introduced himself softly, saying he used to teach music but had retired years ago. He praised her playing, noting the natural talent and the way she expressed emotion through every note. The little girl listened, a mixture of shyness and pride on her face. No one had ever noticed her gift before, and hearing it spoken aloud made her feel seen in a way she never had. He asked her if she had ever had lessons or a teacher, and she shook her head. Music had always been her secret, something she carried inside herself. She played because she loved it, not because anyone told her to. The man smiled, clearly impressed, and asked if she would like to continue learning, if he could help her. The little girl's eyes widened. She didn't fully understand what that might mean, but the thought filled her with hope. The crowd slowly began to disperse, some offering kind words, others dropping small coins into her hat. The little girl stayed for a moment longer, touching the keys gently, remembering the sounds she had created. She felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known in months. For a brief time, she had not been a street child, ignored or mocked. She had been a musician, an artist, a creator of beauty. And that feeling stayed with her as she walked away, back to the small corners and hidden places that had been her home. As she moved through the streets, she imagined the possibilities. Maybe she could play again tomorrow. Maybe more people would hear her. The city seemed less cold, less indifferent. The piano had given her a voice, and people had listened. She hummed softly to herself, creating new melodies in her mind, thinking of how each note could reach someone, could touch a heart, could change a moment. The thought was thrilling, filling her with cautious excitement. When she found a safe place to rest, she sat quietly, reflecting on the morning's events. Music had been her companion, her escape, her secret, and now it was becoming her connection to the world. She realized that even in hardship, she had something no one could take away. Talent, courage, and hope lived inside her, waiting for moments like this to shine. And as the sun climbed higher, warming the streets and chasing away the chill, she felt a sense of possibility she had not known before. The little girl who had been mocked had transformed that moment into something extraordinary, and she knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. That afternoon, the little girl found herself drawn back to the plaza. The memory of the morning's music lingered in her mind like a warm light, and she couldn't resist returning to the piano that had given her so much joy. She walked slowly, her small shoes making soft sounds against the pavement. Around her, the city was alive with the usual noises. Vendors calling out, people chatting and laughing, cars honking in the distance. But when she stepped into the plaza, the world seemed to slow for a moment. As if waiting for her fingers to touch the keys once more, she approached the piano cautiously, as though it were a friend she hadn't seen in a long time. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, feeling the familiar cold surface beneath them. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, remembering the melodies she had created that morning. Then she began to play. The notes flowed naturally, gentle at first, like a soft breeze moving through the city. Then she grew bolder, adding flourishes and improvisations that made the music soar. Each note carried her emotions, her hope, her fear, her longing, and her quiet joy. People began to notice quickly. A woman walking her dog paused, letting the leash slip from her hand as she listened. A man carrying a briefcase stopped mid-step, tilting his head in surprise. Even the children playing nearby were drawn toward the sound, their games forgotten as they watched the small girl command the piano with grace and skill. Her music seemed to fill the entire plaza, wrapping around the stone benches and fountain, echoing against the buildings, and mingling with the distant hum of the city. The teenagers who had mocked her the previous day appeared once again. They lingered at the edge of the crowd, unsure of what to expect. One of them whispered to the others, clearly doubting that the girl could replicate her performance. But as soon as the music reached their ears, their expressions changed. They could not believe the skill, the emotion, and the confidence in such small hands. The smirks that had defined them the day before were gone, replaced by awe and quiet admiration. Some shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to retreat or stay and witness the miracle unfolding before them. The little girl played without pause, her mind fully absorbed in the music. She transitioned from soft, delicate melodies to more lively and energetic rhythms, experimenting with patterns she had never tried before. Each note seemed to respond to her emotions, and she felt as if the piano was speaking back to her, guiding her fingers and inspiring new ideas. It was as if she and the instrument had become one, creating a conversation without words. A dialogue felt by everyone who stopped to listen. People began gathering in larger numbers, drawn by the enchanting sounds. Some stood silently, while others whispered to friends and strangers, marveling at the tiny girl who played with such confidence and heart. Passers-by began taking out their phones, recording the performance, careful not to disrupt her flow. The plaza was filled with a sense of wonder, a shared acknowledgement that they were witnessing something extraordinary. And yet, the little girl remained unaware of the attention, lost in the beauty of her own creation. As she continued, she remembered the hardships that had brought her to this moment. Nights spent shivering under blankets of old coats, days without proper food, the loneliness of wandering through the streets with no one to care for her. All of it seemed to pour into the music she created. Each note carried a piece of her story, a reflection of her resilience, her courage, and her longing for a life that felt more complete. For the first time, she realized that the pain she had endured could be transformed into something beautiful, something that touched the hearts of strangers and changed the way they saw her. A man stepped closer, careful not to disturb the crowd or the girl. He was older, with gentle eyes and a calm presence. He watched her intently, noticing the natural grace in her playing, the way she expressed herself through every note. He had been a music teacher for many years before retiring, and he recognized talent when he saw it. This was more than talent. It was raw emotion, creativity, and intuition all in one. He realized that this little girl had the potential to become something extraordinary if she was given guidance and support. After a while, the little girl finished her piece, letting the final note linger in the air. The plaza erupted in applause. People clapped, cheered, and some even whistled in admiration. She looked up for the first time, blinking at the crowd that had formed around her. There were smiles, nods, and encouraging gestures. Even the teenagers who had mocked her now stepped forward, hesitant but respectful. One of them, the loudest the day before, muttered, "I didn't know you could really do that." His friends nodded silently, unable to find words that matched the impact of what they had just witnessed. The older man approached her gently, kneeling to meet her at eye level. He introduced himself and praised her playing, speaking softly but with genuine warmth. He asked if she had ever had lessons or a teacher, and she shook her head, a shy smile appearing on her face. Music had always been her secret, something she had carried inside herself, and she had played because she loved it, not for anyone else. The man nodded, clearly impressed, and asked if she would like to continue learning, if he could help her. Her eyes widened with a mixture of surprise and excitement, and for the first time, she felt that something beyond the streets, beyond survival, might be possible. As the crowd began to disperse, some offering coins or kind words, she remained near the piano, touching the keys lightly. The warmth of recognition and encouragement filled her chest, giving her a sense of worth she had not felt in a long time. Music had become more than an escape. It had become a bridge between her and the world. Through it, she had been seen, appreciated, and respected. For the first time, she understood that her gift could open doors, touch hearts, and perhaps even change her life. When she finally left the plaza, she walked slowly, replaying the melodies in her mind. She imagined all the possibilities, playing for people who wanted to hear her, learning new songs, creating music that could reach far beyond the streets she had called home. The city felt less intimidating, less cold. The piano had given her a voice, and for the first time, she felt that voice could be heard. She hummed softly to herself, thinking of the next piece she might play, the next melody she might create, and the people who would listen with wonder. That night, she found a safe place to rest. She curled up under her thin coats, still humming the melodies she had played. Her mind was alive with possibilities, and her heart carried a spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. She had faced fear, mockery, and doubt, and had transformed those moments into triumph. The little girl who had once been invisible on the streets had found a way to make herself seen, to make her presence felt through music. And as she drifted into a quiet sleep, she dreamed not just of survival, but of a future filled with music, joy, and the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The next morning, the little girl woke up with the city slowly coming to life around her. She felt a sense of anticipation in her chest, as if something important was about to happen. The memory of the applause, the smiles, and the warm words from the previous day stayed with her. For the first time, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Today, she would return to the piano, and something inside her told her it might be different this time. She wandered through familiar streets, careful to avoid the crowded areas where people might push or shove. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the previous day, but the thought of the piano kept her moving forward. She imagined the keys beneath her fingers, the melodies she would play, and the feeling of being seen not just as a street child, but as someone with a gift. When she reached the plaza, the piano stood waiting, the morning light reflecting softly off its worn surface. A few early risers had already stopped to listen, drawn by curiosity. She hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath, then sat down and let her fingers find the keys. The notes that came out were soft and cautious at first, testing the instrument and herself. Then, as confidence grew, she began to play with more freedom, letting the music flow naturally, expressing every thought and feeling she carried. The crowd slowly began to gather, more people noticing her than before. Some were children, curious and wide-eyed. Others were adults who paused from their routines, captivated by the small girl playing with such skill and emotion. She played pieces she had memorized, but also began to create new melodies on the spot. Each note seemed to carry a piece of her story, her struggles, her hopes, and her dreams. Among the crowd was the older man who had spoken to her the previous day. He watched quietly, his eyes filled with warmth and admiration. He recognized not only her talent, but also her courage and resilience. She had faced ridicule, fear, and the harshness of life on the streets, and yet she played with confidence and heart. He knew that this child had potential far beyond what anyone could imagine. Quietly, he decided to approach her after she finished playing, to offer guidance and support that could change her life. The teenagers who had mocked her before were there again, standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd. Their expressions were a mix of embarrassment and wonder. They had come expecting to see a child struggle, but instead witnessed someone whose talent and spirit shone brightly. They didn't know how to respond, so they stayed silent, watching as the little girl transformed the plaza into a place of magic with her music. She continued playing, transitioning from soft, gentle tunes to lively, energetic rhythms. The melodies swirled around the plaza, mingling with the sounds of the city. Passers-by stopped, some whispering to friends, others recording with their phones. Children sat on the ground, entranced, and adults nodded along, feeling the emotions the music carried. The little girl felt a deep connection to everyone around her, a sense of shared experience that she had never known before. Music had given her a voice, and it was being heard, understood, and appreciated. After a long session, she finally paused, letting the last note linger in the air. The crowd erupted in applause, some cheering, others clapping softly. She looked up, blinking at the faces around her. There were smiles, nods, and gestures of encouragement. Even the teenagers stepped forward, hesitant but respectful. One of them murmured, I didn't think you could really do that." His friends nodded silently, acknowledging her talent without needing to speak further. The older man approached her again, kneeling to meet her at eye level. He spoke softly, praising her skill and expression. He asked if she had ever had a teacher, and she shook her head, shy but proud. Music had always been her secret, something she carried inside herself. The man smiled and offered to help her learn, to give her lessons and guidance that could refine her natural abilities. Her eyes widened with a mixture of surprise, hope, and excitement. She didn't fully understand what this could mean, but she felt a spark of possibility she had never felt before. As the crowd dispersed, some leaving coins or kind words. The little girl stayed near the piano for a moment longer, touching the keys lightly. She felt a sense of belonging and accomplishment. Music had become more than an escape. It had become a bridge to the world, a way for her to be seen and valued. For the first time, she realized that her life could hold more than survival. There were opportunities, people who cared, and a path that could lead her to something greater. That afternoon, she met with the older man in a small, quiet room nearby. He had brought a simple keyboard for practice, and they sat together, exploring scales, simple exercises, and basic music theory. The little girl listened intently, her small hands moving over the keys with curiosity and eagerness. She absorbed everything he taught with remarkable focus, eager to learn and improve. For the first time, she felt that her music could grow, that her gift could be nurtured and expanded. Over the next few days, she continued to return to the plaza, playing for anyone who would stop and listen. Each time the crowd grew and her confidence increased. She experimented with new melodies, tried improvisation, and began to develop her own style. The applause and encouragement reinforced her belief in herself, showing her that talent, perseverance, and courage could change the way people saw her. She was no longer invisible. She had a presence, a voice, and a story to tell. As she played, the older man worked with her regularly, helping her understand rhythm, timing, and expression. He encouraged her creativity, teaching her to trust her instincts while providing guidance to refine her skills. The little girl flourished under his mentorship, her love for music growing stronger each day. She discovered that music could be more than survival. It could be a way to connect, to inspire, and to bring joy to others. One evening, after a long day of practice and playing in the plaza, the little girl sat quietly on a bench, reflecting on how far she had come. She had faced ridicule, loneliness, and hardship, yet she had turned those experiences into something beautiful. Music had given her courage, hope, and a sense of purpose. She realized that even in the harshest conditions, there was always the possibility of change, growth, and opportunity. The city around her seemed less intimidating, more alive, and full of promise. As she drifted off to sleep that night, her mind filled with melodies and dreams of the future. She imagined playing in larger places, sharing her music with more people, and learning new skills that could take her even further. The little girl who had once been invisible on the streets had found her voice, her talent, and her place in the world. And as the city slept, she dreamed of a life filled with music, hope, and endless possibilities, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that would continue to shape her in ways she could not yet imagine. The morning sun broke over the city, casting a warm glow on the streets as the little girl made her way back to the plaza. She carried a small bundle of belongings in a tattered cloth, but her heart felt light, full of anticipation. Today felt different. There was a sense of possibility in the air, a quiet promise that something new and meaningful could happen. She approached the familiar piano with a sense of reverence, her fingers hovering just above the keys for a moment, feeling the coolness of the warm wood beneath her skin. Taking a deep breath, she sat down and began to play. Her fingers moved naturally, flowing over the keys with confidence and emotion. The melodies were richer now, fuller, and filled with subtle flourishes she had been practicing. Each note carried her experiences, the hardships, the joys, the quiet moments of hope she had clung to. As she played, she felt an invisible connection to everyone around her, as if the city itself was listening and responding to her music. People began to gather, drawn by the enchanting sound. Children stopped their games. Adults paused from their routines, and even passers-by who had not yet seen her were compelled to listen. Her music seemed to weave through the plaza, softening the edges of the city and creating a moment of shared beauty. The little girl was unaware of the growing crowd. She was fully absorbed in the music, letting her heart guide her hands and her soul speak through the piano. The older man who had become her mentor stood nearby, watching with pride and admiration. He could see how far she had come in such a short time, and he knew this was only the beginning. She played with not only skill, but also a depth of feeling that could touch anyone who heard it. He smiled quietly to himself, realizing that the little girl who had once been overlooked and dismissed now had the power to inspire and move others with her music. As the crowd grew, the teenagers who had mocked her long ago lingered at the edges, unsure of how to react. Their earlier ridicule had been replaced with awe and respect. They whispered among themselves, noting the precision, emotion, and creativity in every note. The little girl, completely unaware of their presence, continued to play, her melodies rising and falling like waves. Each variation, each improvisation, told a story of resilience, courage, and hope. Hours passed, though it felt like mere moments to her. The plaza became a stage where strangers shared a collective experience, bound together by the music. Some whispered words of encouragement, others dropped coins into a small container, not out of necessity, but to show appreciation. The little girl's eyes sparkled as she played, feeling the energy of the people around her. She had never imagined that her music could have such an impact, that it could draw strangers together and create a moment of beauty in the everyday chaos of the city. After a long and heartfelt performance, she finally paused, letting the last note hang in the air. The plaza erupted in applause, cheers, and spontaneous clapping. Some people were moved to tears, while others smiled broadly, touched by the depth and sincerity of her performance. The little girl looked up, blinking at the faces surrounding her. For the first time, she fully realized that she was seen, not just as a street child, but as someone with a voice, talent, and purpose. The older man approached her again, kneeling to meet her at eye level. He spoke softly, praising her growth and the way she expressed herself through music. He offered continued guidance, opportunities to learn more, and the possibility of performing in places beyond the plaza. The little girl's eyes widened with excitement and hope. She had never considered a life beyond the streets, and now the idea seemed possible, tangible, and inspiring. People in the crowd began to speak with one another about the little girl's talent. Some discussed ways to help her, offering resources or connections to others who could support her musical journey. The teenagers who had once mocked her now approached with humility, offering apologies and admiration. She listened quietly, a shy smile on her face, feeling a sense of belonging and acceptance that had been missing for so long. As the day wore on, she continued to play in short bursts, experimenting with new melodies and improvisations. The crowd remained, eager to witness her growth and the unfolding of her talent. Children sat closer, learning from her movements, while adults nodded along, feeling the emotional weight and joy in each note. The plaza had become a sanctuary, a place where music created connection and transformed the ordinary into something extraordinary. Later, the older man took her aside to introduce her to a small music program designed to nurture young talent. He explained how she could learn more formally, practice under guidance, and eventually perform in larger venues. The little girl's heart swelled with anticipation. For the first time in her life, she felt that her dreams were within reach. Music had given her a voice, and now it offered her a path forward, a chance to grow and explore the world beyond the streets. That evening, as she settled in a quiet corner to rest, she reflected on how far she had come. From a small, overlooked street child to a young musician capable of captivating a crowd, her journey had been filled with challenges and triumphs. Each hardship had shaped her. Each note she played had transformed her experiences into something beautiful. Music had been her companion, her refuge, and her bridge to a life filled with possibilities. She imagined her future with hope and determination. She would continue to play, learn, and grow, using her talent to inspire others and create beauty wherever she went. The plaza would always hold a special place in her heart, the place where she had first been seen, where her music had touched the hearts of strangers, and where her journey had truly begun. And as the city around her continued its relentless pace, she felt a quiet confidence that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength, courage, and gift to face them. As she drifted into sleep that night, her mind was filled with melodies and dreams of the future. She imagined performing in new places, meeting people who shared her passion for music, and discovering the endless possibilities that awaited her. The little girl who had once been invisible had found her voice, her purpose, and a world of opportunity through music. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning of a life that would continue to grow, inspire, and shine brightly for years to come.